Chapter 1: The Money System. Cooperatism was the forerunner of the social system that is in place today throughout all the various provinces, sectors, and complexes in the Sun system and beyond. It began in times when humanity was still confined to planet Earth and was just beginning to venture out of its atmosphere. Eventually converting to the cooperative system is what allowed humanity to realize its full potential and to make the huge strides necessary to usher in its present place in the galaxy. All of the systems that preceded cooperatism were based on a payment structure called a money system, which gave people access to goods and services. Though initially considered an advancement in commerce, the system proved more of a hindrance to humanity's progress. However, most people viewed it as just the opposite, more of a facilitator and a catalyst for progress. But money became a necessity, often an obsession, and dictated the quality of one's life. Time proved the detriments of the system, and it was shed in favor of cooperatism, and this marked the dawn of the age of unilateral prosperity. Automationism, the natural extension of cooperatism, would not have been possible under a money system, not because technology was lacking, but because jobs were always needed to secure an income, which was a consistent periodic acquisition of money. And automationism eliminates jobs. It's only possible if people are free from the need for income. The progression to the various forms and extensions of early cooperatism is easily understood by the present-day reader. However, getting to cooperatism from its predecessor was not at all easy. How humanity accomplished it is the focus of this study. We will point out the significant events that led to cooperatism using carefully compiled essays that were written by people either living in that period or by those who were commenting in hindsight not long after the transition. We have chosen writings that history seems to have acknowledged as being the most genuine and reflective of the times, and we comment on and augment these writings where appropriate. We are hopeful the reader will comprehend the difficulty and huge accomplishment the transition represented. To begin with, we share with the reader an essay by David Matheson, which gives us a concise account of the system that preceded cooperatism. This system remained unquestioned for thousands of years as the most fair and effective way for man to trade and distribute goods and services. It was the basis for all interaction in society and evolved into a complex and highly detailed structure affecting all aspects of life. Mr. Matheson's essay was written several hundred years after the transition. However, it is considered to be quite accurate and has the advantage of being relatively accessible to the uninitiated modern reader. It renders a basic yet adequate understanding of this type of system without the need for any extensive prerequisite background. Before Cooperatism, an essay by David Matheson. Before cooperatism, there was an elaborate point system. Points were transferred between individuals and groups. They determined what goods and services you were entitled to. This is how almost everything was acquired and accomplished. The distribution of these points was not uniform, as one might expect. Some people had to perform very hard physical labor many hours a week to gain very few points. Others did very little and were able to acquire a great deal of points using the points and labor of others. These huge imbalances were supported by the system itself, and this, along with the system's inability to provide happy, fulfilling lives for the majority of the populace, most certainly led to its demise. Points were referred to as money, and money was everything. Without it, you could attain nothing. With a great deal of it, you could live like a king. Money and life were inseparable. Everything in life translated into some sort of monetary value, even pain and suffering. People were able to demand money as compensation from someone or some entity that was considered at fault. Money became the arbitrator for almost all disputes. It could also demonstrate how much you loved or cared for someone else, gauged by the price of gifts you purchased for them. Advertising was an industry that used psychological techniques to persuade the public to buy a particular product or service. This industry was extensively used by vendors to give them an edge in the very competitive world of business. Even religions required money to function. Followers could demonstrate their piety by tithing or giving points to their church. It was considered a measure of devotion. The skill of an athlete would translate into a monetary contract. The status of works of art were directly translatable into what people were willing to pay for them. There were many layers, levels, and facets to this monetary translation, but it remained limiting to the general populace and unbalanced in favor of those with more money. It became controlling and destructive. People's lives were spent judging everything, including the value of human beings, according to their monetary promise. Even time could be put into financial terms. A common consideration was the calculation of how much money an individual's time was worth. The legal system often mandated fines for breaking certain laws. Entire governments were dependent on income to function. It was acquired through a complex taxation system. Most individuals acquired money as payment for doing something that someone else wanted done or producing something that someone else would pay to have. There would be an agreement between the two parties as to how many points the receiver would transfer to the supplier for what they would receive. If there was no agreement, then there was no exchange, and the transaction did not occur. The system functioned because money was generic and universal by popular agreement. It was agreed that money could be used to obtain anything. This agreement gave points their value, and it was only this agreement that gave points their value. The points themselves were simply an idea, a concept, nothing more. At first, these points represented a certain measure of a precious metal such as gold, silver, or platinum. This gave the money its underlying value. But toward the end of the money system's reign, this concept was discarded and money retained its value simply by the aforementioned agreement. This was known as the fiat system, which simply meant that money was no longer supported by any real, tangible asset. Physical money was nothing more than elaborately designed pieces of paper designating a specific number of points. These documents were so intricately and elaborately designed that it was extremely difficult to copy or forge them. This was, of course, the intent, as it was illegal for anyone to produce them. Only an official government-sanctioned agency had this authority. The printing of money was used as a stabilizing or controlling factor with regard to the economy, which was the functioning of the money system within a society. The documents had various denominations: 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, etc. There were also small metallic circular discs referred to as coins that represented a percentage of a point. These physical representations in paper and coin were referred to as money. It wasn't necessary to produce the actual physical money in order to be credited with the points. This is also a common stumbling block for those unfamiliar with the system. In the latter stages of the money system, as technology advanced into the computer era, which were early electronic devices used to calculate, store, and communicate information, the transfer of points often became mere computer entries, which kept track of people's wealth. For people living in those times, the value of money was more fact than agreement. People rarely thought of it as agreement, for it had become so universal and so necessary, such an integral part of reality, that for all intents and purposes, it was fact. It was as tangible, real, and essential as air and water, and was just as necessary. Money determined how much of a person's life was their own and how much of it was not. The perception was that the more points someone had, the happier they would be. And for the most part, if only in a material sense, this was true. Money represented power, both personal and group power. It could be used to coerce individuals or whole groups into being ethical or unethical, moral or immoral, kind or cruel. It rewarded and discouraged all manner of various behaviors. It gave one the means to conquer and subjugate, or even turn brother against brother. The system evolved from simple bartering into a more versatile mode of conducting commerce. It grew and mutated into a complex, intricate tool for manipulating and controlling outcomes for personal advantage, gain, and profit. It encouraged corruption, greed, and all other such vices. It allowed wealthy individuals to wield great power with their money and gave many the means to live different degrees of more privileged lives. People were continually evaluating their points. Much of each day was devoted to point acquisition, inventory, management, and security. A plethora of criminal activity flourished as a means to attain more money. Theft, robbery, prostitution, racketeering, blackmail, kidnapping, drug dealing, embezzling, extortion were just a few of the unlawful practices used to this end. The quest for money often led to lies, cheating, stealing, and even murder. Whole industries developed around the concept of using money to get money, which seems to contradict the original idea of needing to produce or sell something tangible and or useful. Money could be lent to individuals or groups, putting them in debt to the lender. For this privilege, the borrower would agree to pay back the original amount plus an additional fee. Borrowing and debt became a common practice throughout life. The credit industry, which was in the business of lending money, as well as the insurance industry, which were agencies that charged a periodic fee for financial protection from major or minor disasters that may befall an individual or group, the remedy of which may be too costly for them to afford. The gambling industry, in which people would buy a bet that a certain outcome would transpire, allowing them to take the points of all of those that had bet incorrectly. And the investing industry, similar to the gambling industry, but with the exception that you were betting on the profitability, which was the ability to acquire a great deal of money, of certain business ventures, were all examples of businesses that sold money services in order to acquire money from others. In this type of system, most people had jobs for which they would receive an agreed-upon number of points. The amount of points earned for any particular job would vary greatly and was determined by variables agreed upon by the employer and the employee. Economies went through regular cycles, predictable to a degree. If people spent more, then companies and industries flourished, creating more jobs, more incomes, and therefore more spending. This led to overspending and overborrowing, to the point where people couldn't pay back the borrowed money, creating a state of panic, referred to as a recession, or in more serious circumstances, a depression. Spending became conservative, causing companies to go out of business due to lack of sales, which led to job loss. Consumer buying habits were often volatile and unpredictable, and could be affected on a grand scale by many factors, real and imaginary. Very often, people providing the most essential services for society reaped the least financial benefit. It was quite common for professional athletes, dartrons, movie actors, similar to our holocelebs, only real people, and popular musicians, which are our layerists, to accumulate millions of points per year, while the workers that provided electric power and running water to your home or who farmed to put food on your table made very little in comparison. Not only products and services, but ideas were routinely bought and sold. This is exemplary of how money infiltrated every aspect of life in society. Even medical services would cost points. Medical care was generally very expensive, and these costs could devastate a family's points, making them destitute or moneyless. This is how the aforementioned insurance industry developed. People were willing to make monthly payments to safeguard themselves against this type of forced financial ruin. Innovative discoveries and inventions often resulted in lost jobs and hardships for large numbers of people and families. There was always a price to pay, a certain trade-off. It would cost people money or cost them jobs, but cost was inevitable. The money system at its most fundamental level, an extension of the barter system, was an advancement, but the way in which it developed and evolved and the characteristics it acquired caused insurmountable problems. It was no longer simply a more versatile way of conducting commerce. It was generally believed that with hard work and effort, anyone could prosper by gaining points, and through increasing their points, find happiness, since happiness and point accumulation were so strongly linked. I cite a quote of this period by a profound man, a spiritual leader of the time, having the religious title of the Dalai Lama. When asked what surprised him most about humanity, he answered, "Man, because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived." This seems to encapsulate the basic problem with human life for the vast majority of the world's population during the money system eras. The demands of economic stability became obstacles to people living happy, fulfilling lives. The lack of money created problems, and the acquisition of money brought with it its own set of difficulties. The apparent happiness it would bring began a lifelong quest of people seeking paths that would bring them more, and kept them constantly on guard against others who were legitimately or illegitimately trying to take as many of their points from them as they could. I end with a quote from an American philosopher of the 1800s, Henry David Thoreau. Quote, "It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves." End quote. Mr. Matheson's brief depiction of the money system and of its effects and consequences serves as a foundation, a starting point for us to illuminate how cooperatism came to be. It not only gives us a basic understanding of the system itself, but also gives us some insight into the mindset of those living under it. And this, we feel, is essential to truly understanding the intricacies of humanity's struggle to rid itself of it.